Today's gospel lesson, to some of us, or perhaps all of us, be a bit unsettling. Jesus begins to instruct the disciples on what to do when they hear of wars and rumors of wars, famine and pestilence, and political partisanship. What are we to make of all these things? Do they signal the end of the age? And Jesus says, not so. But these things occur not to frighten us, but in order to strengthen our faith in God. I'm not sure why those who compile the lectionaries begin with the 5th verse of the 21st chapter of Luke's Gospel. It seems to me it would have been more fitting to start with Luke 21:1, which is the widow's mite. Jesus is in the temple, and there are folk who are putting large sums of money in the temple treasury. I suspect that this group was made up of folk who were influential, powerful, the highly educated, those who were at the center of life in Jerusalem. And it seems that the disciples were distracted by what they were doing. I suspect that the disciples were distracted by those who were putting large sums of money into the temple treasury, because like most of us, we are often in awe of people with power, people with influence. As much as we'd like to say that our lives aren't shaped by those individuals, the reality is we know who they are because we hear their names on a constant basis, the rich and the powerful, what they're doing with their resources and their money, who they're helping, who they're not helping, what they can do to change the world. And so I suspect that the disciples are much like those of us today in church today. We know people because of what they have, not because of what they lack. And so their disciples are watching all of the wealthy folk put money into the temple treasury and are probably watching to some degree even out of envy, out of jealousy. They're human beings, wishing that they had what they had. But Jesus is looking this way while the disciples are looking that way. And this way, over here in the corner, is a widow that no one's paying attention to. She's not a part of the power structure. They probably don't even know her name. She doesn't garner attention. She's utterly and totally dependent on the goodness and kindness of other people, because as a widow, there's no one to take care of her basic needs. She's certainly ostracized and marginalized. But for some reason, she gets Jesus' attention. While the disciples are focusing on the haves, Jesus is focused on the have-not. And Jesus says to his disciples, those who are giving large sums of money are giving out of their abundance. But this widow is giving all that she has because she trusts in God. The reason I believe that Luke 21:1 and following, the story of the widow's mite, should start today's text is because that's exactly what Jesus is trying to point his disciples to in today's gospel lesson. Don't focus on the ways and things of the world in order to define what God deems to be success. Success has little to do with what one accomplishes or amasses in life, but it has everything to do with our willingness when our back is against the wall, when it seems as if there is no way out, when we are confronted with all types of challenges and obstacles in life, to still give all that we have, knowing that God will provide a way forward. And so Jesus is calling attention to the widow because she is giving all that she has, knowing that God will provide for her very need. She trusts in God in a way that the rest of the disciples, and even those perhaps putting large sums of money, can't even begin to identify. The widow understands what it means to be in a right relationship with God, one that is trusting, one that is loving, and one that is sacrificial. And this is the life that we as Christians are called to embrace. One of the reasons I love the widow's mite story is because it often reminds me of the first church I served after being ordained a deacon. And sometimes I think back to this time because it wasn't joyful at the time, but when you've been with the Lord long enough and you've walked in the footsteps of Christ, and as an ordained priest, I'm able to look back and I'm able to see that God was teaching me something that I wasn't ready to embrace at the time. But when I was newly ordained as a deacon, I was assigned to a large parish as the assistant to the rector. It's a parish much like Grace Church. A lot of people, a lot of resources, a lot of ministry. I mean, it's just a wonderful place to be. Look forward to going there every Sunday for worship. But then the bishop said, but when you become a priest, I'm also going to give you charge over this small church in South Houston, and you are to care for the people there. Unlike the first parish, the parish that I had been assigned to, this small church had on a great Sunday, not a good Sunday, a great Sunday, anywhere from 10 to 12 people. Those were Easter numbers for this parish. And I remember thinking, what am I to do here? I think there was, if I remember correctly, there was one child. Most of the parishioners in the small church were either retired, semi-retired, living on fixed income. And many of them were twice my age. The majority of the congregation was twice my age. And as I think about that parish, I remember every Sunday at the end of church, the rector, me, the wardens, and the treasurer will go into another room and count the money in the plate to figure out what bills we could pay that day. Every Sunday, we went into another room. The treasurer had a stenographer pad, and she wrote down the bills that had to be paid, what amount, what came in versus what was in the bank. As you can imagine, it wasn't much in the collection plate, but people sacrificially gave out of their abundance. They gave because they loved that place. Unlike the big church I served where that wasn't an issue, here, every Sunday, we were trying to figure out how we were going to make ministry happen. This small band of Christians would come together in this small church and would put money that was a sacrifice to the families and to the individuals into the plate so that ministry, whatever that looked like, could happen. And I just remember the treasurer writing the light bill, the gas bill, the water bill, the trash. We need this, we need that, and never had enough money to do any of that. And then it happened. I couldn't make this up, Grace Church. On a bishop's visit to the little church, the lights had been turned off because the church could not pay the light bill. And so I met the bishop in the parking lot. And I told him, I said, we don't have any lights. The lights were turned off. And I thought, as a newly ordained person, that he was going to scold me. I really did. This is how you're going to start off in ministry. You can't even keep the lights on for these people. I entrusted you with the little, And now I'm here to preach in the dark. It wasn't dark per se because it was in the morning, but it was dark in the church. But in the parking lot, you know what he said? It's all right, Alan. We'll get through it. And I remember just looking at him saying, wow, so this is what mercy feels like. This is what grace feels like. But I was still embarrassed. I'll never forget, I was embarrassed. And this was the diocesan bishop, the head man. And he came into the church and he had his sermon and he put his sermon on the pulpit. And near the pulpit was a stained glass panel. And it was clear glass. And so some of the light from outside was able to come and hit the pulpit so that the bishop could have some natural light. But I just remember watching him while he preached, using natural light to preach his sermon, and never once scolded the congregation for not having light. Because he knew that the people there reminded him, I suspect, as it reminded me, that these people were like the widow. They're giving the best. They're giving all that they had, and they love this church. And I kept thinking if he was going to say something to me afterwards, maybe he's waiting for church to end and for people to leave, and then he's going to pull me in my office and say, how could you allow this to happen? But never did the bishop say anything to me about the lights being turned off. I had to grow into the stature of Christ. I had to be reminded that church isn't about the big buildings and having lights and having brass and having silver, but it's about people. It's about people coming together every Sunday, bringing what they have, giving it to the Lord in a trusting way. When I think back over these almost 30 years of life, I've had the privilege, the divine privilege of serving some really, really awesome congregations like Grace Church. But every once in a while, God will remind me of that little church, my first church, when I was 25 years old, didn't know what I had gotten into, wasn't sure what to expect, wasn't sure if I could lead the people. Most of the people in the congregation were old enough to be my mother. One woman told me, I don't listen to my son. What makes you think I'm going to listen to you? She really did. I'm sure she said it out of love. I think. But God was saying, if you can lead these people and you understand that this is what ministry is all about, and if you can accept the fact that I've invited you to participate in what I'm doing in this place, you'll be okay. Don't worry about the lights, Alan. I'll take care of that. Don't worry about the ministries. I'll take care of that. You just be faithful. And you lead the people faithfully. You teach them. You talk about Jesus. You preach about Jesus. You love them unconditionally. And if you can do that, everything else will be taken care of. I will tell you, that is how I see the church. Even at Grace Church, where I know we're not going to have the lights turned off. But I know that if the lights were turned off at Grace Church, we would still be the church. I know that if we could not take care of the building, the infrastructure, we're going to still be the church. Because the church isn't about the building. And that's what Jesus was trying to teach the disciples when they were looking at the temple and they were talking about how large the stones were and the stained glass windows and the massive size of the temple. Jesus says, you're focused on the wrong thing. Don't look at the building. Think about the people. Focus on the people. What about the people? Look at the people's heart. That's church. The temple will go, but the people of God will be here. Love them, care for them, empower them, sustain them. The widow, care for her, take care of her, love her, empower her. Give her grace, give her mercy. And if you can do those things, if we are clear about what it means to be the church, we don't have to worry about wars and rumors of wars and hunger and pestilence and political partisanship. We don't have to worry about betrayal or what we're going to say when we are confronted with crisis. Jesus says, allow the work that you do to speak for itself. When I often talk about Grace Church in the Diocese of Long Island, I never start off by talking about our beautiful building. And Lord knows we have a beautiful building. I mean, when people come to Grace Church and they want to look around, I'm like, go ahead, go at it. Because I know they're going to be in awe at what they see. I know they're going to come in, they're going to look at the ceilings, they're going to admire the pipe organ, the pews, the tile on the floor, the brass railings, you name it, the baptismal font, they're going to admire it. But I want them to ask me about the people, because that's what I talk about when I'm in the diocese. People ask me, we were at convention yesterday, how is Grace? Grace is great. We have a great group of Christians. That's all I'm interested in. I'm just interested in you, in your walk with Christ, just as Jesus was interested in the widow. Grace Church is doing miraculous things in the name of Christ, not because we have a big building, not because we have people who are affluent and we live in a wonderful neighborhood. It's because of you, because of who you are, because of your walk with Christ, because you are willing to stand in the gap for people who cannot fend for themselves. That's what sets us apart from the rest of the world. That's why Jesus was trying to get the disciples to focus. It's not about the buildings. It's not about wealth. It's not about power. It's not about education. Jesus says it's about people. If you make your life about people, you don't have to worry about the bad things that you are hearing and seeing in the world. I suspect that of all the characters in the Bible story today, the one who probably slept soundly at night was the widow. Because for her, nothing shocks her. She knows what it's like to be at the very bottom, and she can sleep soundly because for some reason, known only unto God, she's still with us. She's still praising and serving God, and she's giving out of her abundance. Now, I want to be very clear. At no time does Jesus ever condemn people for being wealthy. At no time. What Jesus does condemn and hold accountable are those who have the resources to help other people. He never condemns anyone for having what they have, because Jesus will tell you what you have came from God in the first place. So I can't condemn what you have. But the test, the divine test is, are you willing to help others who are in need? Can you see beyond your own immediate situation and be in a relationship with someone like the widow, like so many who are unemployed, those who are homeless, those who are trying to figure out how they're going to pay their rent, pay their mortgage, those their children are estranged from them, those who are alone, no one to pray for them, pray with them. Can you be in a relationship with those individuals? Can you help them continue on in their spiritual journey with God? That's what Jesus was trying to get the disciples to see. And I find, Grace, that the people not here in the world, and I really do see this, the people who are in the world who have made materialism and secularism their God are the ones who have sleepless nights. The people who have the most money that they could never in a lifetime spend are always worried about losing some of it. It never makes sense to me. And I don't ever want to be in a position where I can't sleep at night because I have $1 billion and I'm afraid to lose $1 million in the stock market. There are people who, they just want more and want more and want more, and you have to ask yourself, where's the peace? Where's the joy of living? Where's the sense of gratitude, divine gratitude? But putting all that aside, If you and I simply give because we are just so thankful for all of the good things that God has done in our lives, you and I will always sleep peacefully at night. I promise you. The widow, not worried about wars, rumors of wars, pestilence. She's not worried about hunger. She's not worried about being homeless. She's not worried about anything because she knows God. And knowing God gives her that peace that passes all understanding. And so, Grace Church, this morning, I think Jesus is inviting us to develop the kind of faith so that when we hear all of these things that Jesus just spoke about, rumors of wars and political partisanship and betrayal and incarceration, things that really frighten us and frighten most, if not all, of humanity. Jesus is saying, if you have the faith the size of a mustard seed, then you can look at all of those events in the world and see that God is working God's purposes out in and through them. We can either fear those things, or we can see God working God's purposes out in and through them. I will simply end by just giving a quick example, I think, of what I mean by that. If I was a betting man, I would have lost $2. That's my betting limit. I would have lost $2 if someone had told me that Marjorie Taylor Greene would have turned on Donald Trump. I would have said, you know what? I'm about to win my first bet in a long time. But at some point, you have to reconcile whatever faith you have in God with your behavior. At some point, you're going to come in face to face with the divine person. And I don't know if she means it or not. What I will tell you is this. I truly believe she's convicted at some level to try to right some of the wrongs. She has spoken out publicly against withholding food from America's neediest families. She has. She's been vocal about, you release the SNAP funds so that people can feed their families. She's spoken out about what was happening during the war in Gaza from her viewpoint, and several other things. The point I'm trying to make is, at some point, if our relationship with God isn't about justice and doing what is right and caring for other people, we will never find peace. I'd like to think that she perhaps had gotten to a place and point in her life where she just needed some peace. Maybe, maybe not. But I will tell you, Grace Church, keep your eyes on the prize. It's never about the things that the world has to offer. It's about what Christ presents to us. Follow Jesus, serve one another, love unconditionally, and everything else will be okay. Amen.
Amen.